Full disclosure, I don't have a lot negative to say about this show. In fact, I don't really have anything. There are two things that I am briefly going to address. The first is one that I talked about in a previous video last week. There's a card somewhere, I'll link the video there. So if you haven't watched that and are curious about what it is, I suggest you go check that video out. The second is admittedly less serious. This musical tries really hard to make the audience believe that Dylan Saunders is anything other than a beautiful human being. You can make as many funny faces as you want, Dylan. It's really stretching my suspension of disbelief to call you ugly. With that out of the way, I love this musical. It was easily my favorite, no question, when it first came out. First and foremost, I need to talk about the cast. It almost seems redundant to talk about how good the cast of Star Kid shows are. Star Kid is very good at finding talented people to work with. We all know the returning cast is good because they're always good, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. I am, however, going to give a special shout out to Dylan. When this musical was first coming out and it was announced that Dylan was going to be playing Jafar, I was ridiculously excited. And unsurprisingly, Dylan did not disappoint. Up to this point, Dylan had pretty much just played ridiculously over-the-top characters. Dumbledore in the Harry Potter trilogy, Tootsie Noodles and Pinsir in Starship, and his variety of characters in Holy Musical Batman. All characters that may have had a serious moment every now and then, but were primarily comedic in nature. Jafar came in and changed that. He absolutely still has comedic moments, but they're tempered by the sadness that permeates this character. He lends this character the gravitas that it deserves. This character just does a great job at showing off Dylan's strengths. It also starts the trend of giving Dylan sad ballads that will be continued when he returns in Black Friday. As for the new actors, I will briefly address the controversy surrounding Robert Mannion, because this was his first show, and he is going to be in a few moving forward. I'm not going to go into extreme detail because that's not what this video is about, but basically Robert was sending sexually explicit material to a band member even after they asked him to stop. He then very publicly apologized, airing this out to the entire world at once, including those in charge of Star Kid. They subsequently asked him to step away, which is why he wasn't in Nightmare Time Part 2 and Nerdy Prudes Must Die. He also apparently tried to twist this into him choosing to leave because the Star Kid environment was toxic to new people, despite every new person very clearly not agreeing. Needless to say, Robert made a really big error and then proceeded to completely obliterate the bridge behind him. Which means that we will very, very likely never see him in a Star Kid show again. So I'll obviously be talking about his characters moving forward because I have to for the project, but I will no longer be talking about him. Cool? Cool. As for the other new actors, we have three of them to talk about. The first two are people who unfortunately have never done anything else with Star Kid outside of Star Kid Homecoming. The first is Alex Paul, who gives a few very good and subtle performances. She's the only member of the Royal Vizier's evil posse during the Golden Rule Evil Reprise who is genuinely threatening. Everyone else plays up the ham a lot, which is great, but it is also nice to have someone who is just genuinely threatening. She also has a phenomenal soprano voice, which this musical was quick to show off. Alex has an entire extended solo in the opening number, which is very well deserved. The second person is Nick Gage, who was mentioned earlier as the composer for Holy Musical Batman, and as I mentioned there, he does very well here. He plays two roles that requires him to be good at impressions, the Sultan and the Genie. He's able to sound just like the Sultan from the movie, which is made all the more funny by having it set up as if he's going to sound completely different. And the Genie, much like the Genie from the movie, quotes a lot of other sources of media. Unlike the one from the movie, however, this Genie speaks exclusively in quotes from other media, each one requiring a different impression that Nick does really well. In relation to the Genie, I also appreciate that of all the dark and twisted versions of all the other characters, the Genie is the only one that is pretty much just the same. If anything, he's even more ridiculous. The last one I need to talk about who did return for a few other shows is Rachel Soglin. Rachel came in and immediately killed it as Princess. She played this character with the perfect blend of naivete and brattiness. She also plays her character arc really well, letting us see the difference between the beginning of Musical Princess and the end of Musical Princess. On top of that, she just has a really good singing voice, even when she's using her princess voice. Obviously, all of the songs are great. I bring it up here because we do have a newcomer writing music as well as an oldcomer writing music. This is the first musical where A.J. Holmes has written every single song. Obviously, he wrote some of the songs in the Harry Potter trilogies and Me and My Dick, but this is the first one where he is the sole music writer. He wrote the music, while Kelly McMahon, the newcomer, wrote the lyrics. And this is so far the only thing that she has done with StarKid, but what a singular credit to have. They just did such a good job of writing these songs that are such a perfect blend of Disney songs and Wicked songs. I always love different takes on fairy tales. I know that bad ones exist, but I haven't discovered them. Now, I acknowledge that this is a different take of a fairy tale, but it still counts. This musical does such a good job of taking the story that we all know and turning it on its head. Stories are such an integral part of this musical, the telling of them, the twisting of them, and this is just such a well-told story. And like all of their parodies, you can tell that the writers approached this musical with a love for the two source materials. They're perfectly willing to poke fun at it while also praising them at the same time. Finally, there's many things that StarKid does well, but one of their biggest is the ability to take something that is completely and utterly ridiculous and treating it as the most serious thing ever. A very good example of this comes in Trail to Oregon, which I'll talk about when I get there, but there's also a really good example here with the Sultan. In the Sultan's first appearance, he goes on an entire monologue about how he pushed in his penis. This is a good example of raunchy humor, and for a lot of shows, this would be just a bit of crude humor that's thrown in there for the sake of having it. But here, it's an important plot point. As in, the story would make far less sense if this monologue weren't included. It is such a stupid bit that comes in clutch, and not everybody is good at that, but my god, StarKid is. As I said, when this musical came out, it very quickly became my favorite. A few musicals have come out since then that have since usurped it as my favorite, but to this day, I still think this is one of StarKid's best written shows. And it still holds up remarkably well over a decade later. And that is it for this musical. You already know where it goes on the list, but I'll go ahead and show the list to you again just to remind you, and also myself, where everything is placed. Tune in next week where I will watch, literally for the very first time, Annie, a Parody. See you then.